Daf. Welcome again to Masechet Bava Metzia, Daf Dalid. In today's Daf, we are up to where are we up to? We are up to the second line on Daf Dalid, right? So the halacha that we're dealing with. Yep, got some background there. Lost Charlie. Hello, hello. We're just getting started. So today's daf in Masechet Bava Metzia is daf Daled, and I'll say this a few times because it's going to be very relevant, and I don't want anyone to get confused. But the halacha that we are struggling with, I would say, is our Mishnah. I know all are joining, so I'll probably repeat this, but our Mishnah spoke about halacha where you have two people disagreeing about something, right? And you make a shvuah. And the case in our Mishnah essentially was that, well, it actually wasn't the case in our Mishnah. The case that we derived was, so welcome back, everyone. So the case that we're discussing is that we know halacha that a person is modeh b'miktzah. These are the very principles that are going to be very important in this Masechet. If you admit to part of something, right? A person comes over and says, I want my $1,000 back. And you say, I don't know what you're talking about. You gave me $500. You have to pay back the 500, and you have to swear that you don't owe the other 500. If you didn't admit to anything, if a person came over to you and said, I want my $1,000 back, and you said, I don't know who you are, you don't have to swear, right? He has to prove some documentation. But we did say that one aid can compel you to swear, meaning if one witness says, I saw you borrow $1,000, it's not enough to make you pay, but it is enough to make you have to make a shvuah. And the halacha that Rabbi Yechia introduced yesterday was a step beyond that. It was if, let's say, one person says to another, I lent you $1,000, and the person says, I never borrowed anything from you. But witnesses come, two witnesses, and they say, we know that you borrowed for sure $500, meaning we know part of it is true. You for sure have to pay what the witnesses testified to. The question is, what Rabbi Yechia introduced is that not only do you have to pay the half or the part that the witnesses testified to, you have to swear about the rest, because witnesses saying you're chayav for part is stronger than you admitting you're chayav for part. And we're trying to figure out, and that's what we're going to continue today, how Rabbi Yechia knows that. How do you know that witnesses are stronger than your own testimony? So says Rav Papa, the second line at the top of Daf Daled Amud Aleph, Ela Amar Rav Papa ati migilgul shvuah de'ed echad. You know where we learn this? We know how an aid is stricter, stronger than your personal's own testimony from a concept called Gilgul Shvuah. Gilgul Shvuah means, let's say I came to you and said, I want you to swear. You can say, I don't know who you are. I don't want to swear for anything. But if I could be mechayiv you to make a shvuah for one object, meaning if I go to you and I say, I lent you my car 4 times, or I lent you 4 different objects, and you say, I didn't borrow any of them. You don't have to swear. But if you admit that one of them, there's an eid achad, that you borrowed one of them, you would have to swear for that one. And when you come to swear for that one, the owner can say to you, oh, while you're at it, I want you to swear on all the others, and you have to do it. And if you don't, you have to pay. And that's called Gilgul Shvuah, right? We learn it from Sota. So says Rav Papa, Ati mi Gilgul Shvuah de Echad. Just like you learn it from Gilgul Shvuah, which is stronger. Mali says Gemara, that's not a very good proof, because Mali Gilgul Shvuah, third line, de Echad, Shekain Shvuah Goreret Shvuah. The reason you have to make a Shvuah there is because the aid came and made Shvuah 1. Then you have to make Shvuah 2, 3, and 4. But Tomar be'edim, it's not necessarily true by witnesses, Dimamon mechayev, right? They are being mechayev you money, essentially, not a Shvuah, right? When the witnesses come and say, you borrowed 500 of that $1,000, you have to pay 500 based on the witnesses, but you don't have to swear necessarily. How do you know that a Shvuah is added? Answers the Gemara, well, then pivyuchia. Remember, as we said yesterday, when you admit on your own, you have to pay. So that certainly shows that you have to make a shvuah. It's even stronger if people witnesses can make you make a shvuah. Says well, ma'ava piv, as we said yesterday, your own admission is not as vulnerable as edim. Shekain eino b'hakchasha, right? Because remember, there's no concept of contradicting yourself. If you admit, that's the Bible, right? That's it. It's taken. You can't undo that. Whereas witnesses, you can sort of contradict them. So you basically have two aspects that are unique, that are special about witnesses that seem to be stronger than Hoda'at Piv. Each one we had a question about. One is because it's a Gilgul Shvuah, one is because of Hakchasha. So neither one can independently prove that witnesses are stronger than your own admission, but you can combine them together. That's what we do on the fifth line, right? Where am I? Eda Chad Yochiach, where am I? Yes, but or by the fifth line. So Piv Yochiach, Mal Piv Shkein Bak Chasha. This is well, Eda Chad Yochiach, but Eda Chad can question that assumption because Yeshnu Mak Chasha, right? One witness can certainly be questioned about whether they were there, Umechayvo Shvua, but they're able to be Mechayv you a Shvua. Oh, says well, that was different because Mal Eda Chad Shkein Mashmi Hu Nishba. Right? We said yesterday, and Eda Chad comes and says, "I saw you borrow $1,000, so you got to swear about $1,000." But by the two witnesses, they say we saw 500, and the question is, do you have to swear about the other 500? Tomer be'edim, plural, shamasha kafaru nishba, right? What you declined, what you denied you owed is what you're swearing about. And piv yochiach, but then your own admission is against that. And this is what's called a matzad. Chazar hadin, and you go back and forth. Lo re'izeh k're'izeh, the strength or the proof of each one, not the proof, the unique thing about each one is not the same as the unique thing about the other. Lo re'izeh k're'izeh, hatzada shava shebahen, right? The commonality between all these cases of making you make a shvua is sha'ayedei ta'ana ukfira him ba'im. It's based on someone's accusation. Someone says, we know, and you say, I don't, right? You the borrower, the alleged borrower, deny it. Some third party, a witness, in the different cases, could be two witnesses or one witness, come and say, oh, we know you borrowed it, and you have to make a shvua, right? So I will also include the case of the two witnesses where they say you borrowed at least 500. Al pi ayidei ta'ana ukfira, you deny it, heim ba'im v'nishba, and therefore you would have to swear, and that's the proof that Rabbi Chia had, that in the case where witnesses come and say, we saw you at least we saw you take something from this person, even though you deny the extent of it, you deny the whole thing, but even though they can only testify about part of it, you would then have to make a shvua on the rest of it. So that is the tzad shava shebehen, and therefore you can learn from there, Rabbi Chia's halacha, that you make a shvua. Says more, that's not necessarily good proof at all. Because I have a case that I have a commonality between them. Shekain lo huchzak kafran. You have not been proven to be a liar in either case, right? What happened in both cases, again, one witness came and said you did it. We don't trust one witness over you. So it didn't prove that you're a liar, right? But in this case, you denied that you borrowed any money from this person. Two witnesses came and said, we know for a fact, and two witnesses is a fact, that you borrowed 500, right? So you're definitely lying because you said nothing and you for sure owe 500. The question is now, can we make you make a shvua about the rest? But in this case, Tomar be'edim, how can you compare that to the case of edim, shekein huchzak kafran, where you are proven to be a liar, and therefore maybe you shouldn't make a shvua because we don't trust your shvua, right? We only trust a shvua from someone who we think if you make them make a shvua, they're going to actually tell the truth. But this person, potentially, they are going to lie through and through because they're huchzak kafran. And if they're huchzak kafran, maybe we don't make them make a shvua. Says Gemara, is that really true that they're huchzak kafran? Beidim huchzak kafran. Just because we have witnesses that say that you lied about the loan, does that mean you're a liar? Basically, you are a liar. But does it mean you're going to lie about everything? We have a very important, famous comment of Rav Yidi bar Oven and the name of Rav Chisda, that just because a person lies for one thing does not mean that they're a liar, right? People rationalize things all the time, right? And hakofer b'milveh, a person who denies a loan that someone lent them, even though they're lying, we prove that they're lying, still kasher le'edut. You still would trust them to say testimony. And the reason, of course, is, as we talked about yesterday, right? When people borrow money, they're really going to pay it back. And they're only lying, not because they're a liar, but because they think, I can't pay him back now. I'll deny it. I'll push him off and I'll ultimately pay him back. But they rationalize. But they wouldn't tell an out and out lie. They wouldn't swear falsely. But bipikadon, but now if someone gives you something to watch for them, he didn't do you any favors. You're doing him a favor. And then you lie about it, right? He gives you a gold watch to watch for him, and you deny that ever happened, then you're a liar. You're pasulei edut. So the fact that you lied about a loan doesn't necessarily mean that you're a fault. You can't say testimony. Ella perechati. He says, well, okay, you're right. So ask the question the following way. You know what's common about one aid and about a person's own admission? Shekain einan b'torat hazama. right? You can't have hazama, because remember, hazama is that you have to pay back. Hazama means if you were proven to be or alleged to be somewhere else than where you said you were when you made the testimony. Remember, an aid zomem has to pay what they would have made the person pay. But that's only true if it's two aidim, right? Because if you're one aid, you don't actually make a person pay anything. So if you're one aid and you found out to be false because you weren't there, you don't have to pay. You're false, but you don't have to pay. So there's no halacha of paying eidim zomimim in one aid, and there's no halacha of eidim zomimim by your own admission. So that's common between those two cases, and that's where you make a shvua. Tomar be'edim, how do you know it's true when you're talking about plural edim? Sheyeshnam b'torat hazama, right? There is torat hazama. So you're right. That is a good question. Hello, Kashya, but it's not going to stop Rabbi Chia, because Rabbi Chia, torat hazama lo parach. Rabbi Chia does not feel that that's a compelling reason to find a difference. Meaning, Rabbi Chia says the reality is that, it's true that you can't do hazama, but that's a technicality. It's because you need two edim for hazama, but it doesn't actually change the stature or the nature of the testimony, and therefore Rabbi Chia says, I can still learn it out from a tzara shava. So since by one witness, we can make you make a shua. And since by modeh b'miktsas, we can make you make a shua, we combine those together and we're mechayvin to make a shua, even if two witnesses come and they testify not to the thing that you denied, but to the rest of it. Well, they testify that you denied 1,000. They testify that you pay 500, which you do have to pay. And then they can make you make a shua about the other part. Ella, says the Gemara, where are we? Ella, the question we have, and we're around halfway down the daf, it's a smack in the middle of the word, middle of the line. The Ka'amar, when Rabbi Chia finished off his statement by saying, Tana Tuna, that it's supported by our Mishnah, right? So remember, Rabbi Chia's case was where a person claims, Reuven goes over to Shimon and says, you owe me $1,000. Shimon says, I never took a penny from you, right? Two witnesses come and say, we know for a fact that Shimon took at least $500 from Reuven. So he's lying, and he has to pay back $500. Says Rabbi Chia, he's got to also pay back the other $500, right? Yeah, not pay back. He's got to make a shvua about the other $500. And says Rabbi Chia, our Mishnah supports that, because our Mishnah says two people are holding a talis, right? Each one, says Rabbi Chia, is a chazakah, because he's holding it, so you assume it's his. And a chazakah is like edim. And so it's like you have edim that say it's mine, one person, edim that say it's the other. You've got to make a shvua. Says the Gemara, that clearly is not a very good analogy, because our Mishnah was not talking about witnesses. Our Mishnah was talking about where they're grabbing it, right? There's no edim in our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Amar v'tana tuna, when Rabbi Chia says that it's supported by our Mishnah, midami, is it really comparable to our Mishnah? Hatam in our Mishnah, in the case of Rabbi Chia, limalva, right? In the case of Rabbi Chia, limalva itle sa'adi, right? The person who lent the money has witnesses that say that he for sure lent some money to the lova, to the borrower. Lelova letle sa'adi, right? Lelova has no one supporting him. He denied the whole thing, and he's got no support, right? He doesn't have any leg to stand on to say he didn't borrow the money, right? If the lova had witnesses that said that he didn't borrow anything, which of course would be very hard to have, right? But witnesses that said, oh, we testified that Reuven said he didn't lend anything to Shimon, then lo by Rabbi Chia l'shtabuye. Rabbi Chia would not have required you to make a shvua, right? So the case of the Mishnahs where each side is holding on to it, that's not the same as the case of Rabbi Chia, where one person claims the other person borrowed $1,000. The lova, the ostensive lova denies the whole thing, and there are witnesses that only support one side. There's no witnesses on the other side, right? Hacha ki hecha danan sadi bahai, anan sadi bahai. In our Mishnah, we have support for one because he's holding the talis, and support for the other. And the Mishnah still says you make a shvua. So Rabbi Chia's proof that you make a shvua when it's only one party is not similar to our Mishnah. Ella says, well, you're right. It's a mistake. It's sort of an editing error. When Rabbi Chia said that Tana supports it, that actually was referring to our Mishnah supports a different statement of Rabbi Chia, about a different halacha that Rabbi Chia taught. The Amar Rabbi Chia taught another very, very interesting halacha. Okay, and this is, again, we're introducing these things here. We're going to have them over and over in our Masechta. Let's say a person goes to another person and says, Mana li biyadcha, right? I gave you $100. And meaning he's saying, remember last week, You needed money desperately. I gave you $100. I'd like it back. V'ala Omer, and the other party says, Ein lecha bi'adi ala 50 zuz. No, you gave me 50 zuz. Now, if you had stopped there, the halacha is, of course, that's modeh b'miksa, right? You denied that you borrowed 100, but you admitted that you borrowed 50, and so the halacha is you pay back 50, and you have to swear about the other 50. And if you swear that you didn't get it, you can be patur, and if you don't swear, you have to pay it. But says Rabbi Chia, in this case, what the person said was, he didn't stop there. He said, Ein lecha bi'adi ala 50 zuz, v'heilach. Here, take it, right? Here's the 50 zuz. So basically, he paid it back. And so the issue here, this is how Rashi understands the issue. The issue here is that once you pay it back, this is out of the equation. The 50 zuz is no longer in dispute. I paid back the 50 zuz. There's only 50 zuz left behind that one person says the other one owes, and the other one says, I don't know anything. So that's kofer b'kol. You're denying basically everything. But says Rabbi Chia, it's not the way you look at it. Chayav. In fact, the way I just told it to you is wrong. You have to make a shvua. My taima, right? Why does Rabbi Chia say that? Because Halach, even though you said, here it is, you gave it to the person, still, nami kimodeh miktzat ta'ana dami. You only admitted, although you're denying everything that's in discussion now, because you got rid of the part you agreed on, you're denying everything left behind, which sounds like Hofer HaKol, but in fact, the claim of, say, Ruvain on Shimon was you owe me 100. And of the claim, you admitted to half the claim, or part of the claim. And since you admitted to part of the claim, you still have to make a shvua. That is Rabbi Chia's statement. We're going to discuss it more in a second because we're going to see there's an opinion that argues. But says Rabbi Chia, I support that with our Mishnah. B'tana tuna, our Mishnah is in support of this statement of mine. Because what does our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah says, Shnayim ochsim b'talit, two people are holding a garment. One says it's mine, one says it's mine. You make a shvua. Now, hahacha, in our Mishnah, think about it. Kivan de tafes, right? Since each person is actually holding on to it, we add the words here. I don't know if they're in parentheses and yours is mine as well, but the brackets. Anan sadi, we are witnesses. It's literally what it means, or we are confident, right? Demai de tafes helechu, right? What you are grabbing is yours. So basically, you have what you're holding on to, which is 50%. The other person has what they're holding on to, and so therefore, there's really nothing we're arguing about. Right? Each one has their own part. So you might say there's no shvua because there's no partial ownership or partial dispute. But our Mishnah says, Katani Yishava. Our Mishnah says you still swear. So says Rabbi Chia, this supports what I say, that the big picture here is that there's a code. And each one says it's mine, and the other one says it's mine, so they disagree about whose it is. But the fact is, each one is physically holding half of it, and still you make them make a shvua. So that is the opinion of Rabbi Chia. And Rabbi Sheshes argues with Rabbi Chia. And Rabbi Sheshes says, Halech patur, that if you say to the person, I borrowed $50 from you and here it is, right? And the guy says, what about the other $50? And you say, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have any other money. You are patur from a shvua because you are essentially, let's read inside, my taima, kivan to amar le halech, since you said, here's the money, the 50, hani zuzi de kamodi bigavayo, the money that I basically admit that I got from you, the 50 in this case, it's as if you gave them back to the lender. Either you gave them back or it's as if you gave them back. It's as if they're already in your possession. And the rest of it, in the other 50 that you disagree about, halamoti, he doesn't admit to owing any of it. So he denies the whole thing. You don't say that you admitted to part of the claim, even though you did admit to part of the claim, but you basically got rid of the part of the claim you admitted to, you deny the remainder of the claim, and says Rabbi Sheshet, you then don't make a shvua. Ask the Gemara, well, if Rabbi Chia proved it from our Mishnah, with Rav Sheshet makashia matznitin, so then our Mishnah, in fact, seems to be a problem according to Rav Sheshet, right? Because our Mishnah says that even though one is holding it, so presumably it's theirs, one is holding the other half, it's theirs. There's no part that there's sort of in between that's unowned, right? And you still make a shvua. Amar l'cha Rav Sheshet, says Rav Sheshet, well, yeah, you make a shvua in our Mishnah, but it's not because of modeh b'miksa. The reason you make a shvua in our Mishnah is, like we said in the last couple of days, is a takanat chachamim, right? The Mishnah is it's a takanami d'Rabbanan. It's not because of modeh b'miksa. Remember, it's what we said a couple times already. We don't want people walking over other people and just grabbing their stuff and saying it's mine. Right, so therefore, our Mishnah, the Shvua is not because of Modeh b'Miksa. The Mishnah, Shvua is because of Takanat Chachamim. Says, well, it seems like a good point. So how does Rabbi Chia prove it from our Mishnah? Says Rabbi Chia no, in fact, you're correct. The Mishnah is a Takanat Rabbanan. I agree with that. Right? We are 5 lines from the bottom. In Takanat Chachamimi, Umiyu, however, I still can prove my contention from the Mishnah. Because if you say that midoraita, if someone goes over to someone and says, you owe me $100, and he says, I borrowed 50, here it is. I didn't borrow the other 50. You're still chayav to make a shvua in the moda b'mixat midoraita. So then our Mishnah mitakni rabbanan shvua kein doraita. The Mishnah would make a shvua to prevent people from grabbing things from other people that is similar in nature to the shvua doraita. But if in this case where each person basically has possession of the part that they claim, and there you would say that's hilach and hilach is patur, then why would mitakni rabbanan shvua delata de kavate bedoraita? Would the rabbanan ever make rechayev you to make a shvua that has no parallel in a doraita case? And therefore, says Rabbi Chia, I think that hilach, meaning giving over the part that you admit to, doesn't obviate the need for a shvua in modeh b'miktzat, and I prove it from our Mishnah, which doesn't obviate the need for the chachamim to come and make a requirement of a takana of a shvua. And that is the proof Rabbi Chia has. You could see why Rav Sheshet disagrees, but that is the proof of Rabbi Chia. Meitve. Now ask the Gemara the last word on Daf Daled Amud Aleph. What about, we have a question, turn the page to Daf Daled Amud Bet. What about, we have a question now on Rabbi Chia, right? Again, Rabbi Chia says that if you admit to half, but you give it over, you still make a shvua, right? You don't say that part of the deal is closed, basically. What about the following case? So this is a complicated case, but we all signed up for Bava Metzia, so we know what we're getting into, right? So says the bright, the top line, top word of Daf Daled Amud Bet, Silaim Dinarim, right? You have a document, a shtar, that says Ruvain borrowed, let's say, Ruvain lent Slaim to Shimon. Now, Slaim sounds like selas, right? Say dollars is the word, or dinarim, which, let's say quarters, I don't know, some version. So it doesn't say how many, okay? They come to the court at the end, Malva Omer Chamesh. The Malva says, okay, I give you $5. And Lova says, doesn't say anything about $5 in this contract. I borrowed 3. Lova Omer Shalosh. Now, this is complicated because, as we're going to see in a second, he could have said less than 3, right? Because it doesn't say 3 in the contract either. But the Lova says, I borrowed 3. So now is that modeh b'miktzat or not? So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, yeah, hoel hodeh b'miktzat tana yishava. Since the guy admitted to part of it, right? Someone came and said, you owe me 5. And he said, I owe you 3. He admits to part, he denies part, you pay back the 3, and you make a shvua on the other 2. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, this is not similar. Because in this case, eino ela k'meshiv aveda. It's similar to the case where a person returns a lost object. Remember, we have a halakha, kanad d'Rabbanan, that if a person finds a wallet and he goes over and he says, I identified this wallet, it belongs to, Levi, here's your wallet, Levi. Levi opens the wallet and says, thank you for returning it, but it had $1,000 in it, and now there's only $900 in it, right? That the finder does not have to swear that it had only $900, right? Why? He gave back part of what the person claimed, because we're afraid, of course, that people are not going to return anything. It's not like he borrowed money. He's doing a favor, essentially. And in this case, it's the same thing. It's K'meshiv Aveda, because, like I said before, we'll see more detail in a second. Like I said before, he could have denied more than it. He could have said less than 3. And so the fact that he gave back 3 is essentially a kindness, and therefore it's patur for making a shvua about the rest. That's Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Now says the Gemara, think about the case though. Katani mihat. Think about Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. He said it's modeh b'miktzat, right? Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, hodeh b'miktzat tana yishava. That since the person said I owed, it said 3, and the plaintiff said, or the lender said it was 5, you have to make a shvua. But the implication is, taimad amar shalosh. The reason you're making a shvua is because you said 3, which is basically above the minimum, right? Let's say, now we're making this understanding, which we're going to question in a second, that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar only says you're modeh b'miktzat because you said 3, which is more than 2. Meaning if you said 2, that's the baseline. That's what's written in the shtar, right? Only because you admitted to what's above that, you are modeh b'miktzat. But implying that if you were shtayim, if you said, okay, I owe you 2, because the shtar says dollars, then you'd be patur for making a shvua, right? Why you'd be patur? Why don't you say if you admitted to 2, it's as if you admitted to 3 or admitted to 4? It must be because the reason is Hai shtar dekamoti behelechu, right? It's because since the shtar says 2, and so the shtar is as good as it was collected, right? It's a fundamental shtar, meaning the 2 is based on the shtar, and there's no way around that. So it's as if you already paid it back. Ushmami nahilach patur. So you see from here that you wouldn't make a shvua, even according to Rav Shimon Elazar, that's modeh b'miktzat, if you just said 2. Why? Because 2, it's as if you gave it back, and you're denying everything else. It's only when you say 3 that you have to make a shvua, because the third adds another element of hakchasha. So you could prove from there that halach is patur, like Rav Sheshet. That's not a good proof, because it's possible. It could be that Reb Shimon ben Elazar would say that you're chayav for making a shvua, even if you just said, I only owe you 2, which is the minimum you could say from the shtar. So why do we say 3? Haidik Tani Shalosh is to tell you not that the chiddush that you only make a shvua if you say 3, not if you say 2. It's la'afuking mid Rabbi Akiva. It's to tell you that even though 3, Rabbi Akiva says to Amar, Meshiv Aveda Haveu Patur. Rabbi Akiva says, because you said 3, it's Meshiv Aveda and you're Patur. Kamash Malan, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, that I disagree. Even though you're essentially doing him a favor, you are Moda Miksata Tanavi V'chayav. So I say I disagree with that statement of Rabbi Akiva, and that's why we specifically want to talk about 3, because if you talked about 2, you couldn't know that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar argues even in the case of 3. Okay, that's a good halacha, but the language doesn't support that, right? Because when we said in the Braita, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Ho'el v'hodem miksata tana yishava, that since he admitted to part of it, he swears. What Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's chiddush is that not only does he swear, but av ze yishava mibayli, that not only does a regular person, say if you admitted to 2, have to swear, but even when you admit to 3, and we could say, oh, you're doing a kindness by giving him extra, even in that case, you swear. So if Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar wanted to tell you that chiddush, he would have grammatically said it differently. So it can't be that that's the case. It must be lo'olam ela lo'olam shtayim patur, right? Really, 2, if you said, again, the lender said, I lent you 5, and the borrower said, you only lent me 2. If you had said that, you would be patur from a shvua. Why? It must be because halach is as if you already gave it back to him, and halach is patur. So this is why it's not necessarily the case. It could be halach is chayav. I'll read that inside. Ella could be, where am I? Ella la'olam shtayim patur. It could be that if you said 2, you would be patur from a shvua. The halach chayav, and still, if you gave the money, you would still be chayav a shvua. So why are you patur from a shvua in this case? Shani hacha dekamisaya leishtara. The reason here is because it's more than just giving back the money. You actually have a shtar, right? And when you have a shtar, now the question is, what's so special about the shtar? So one explanation is that the shtar basically is essentially, the shtar is as good as your words. So that's how Rashi explains it. You said, I owe you 2, right? But you're not admitting to anything, because it's already written in the shtar with witnesses that are confirmed and proven that you owe 2. So you didn't actually admit to anything, right? All you admitted to which is what was already written in the shtar. But it doesn't prove to you that if you had admitted to something and giving it over, that would prompt you for making a shvua. Here, it's not because it's given over, it's because it's written in the shtar, and therefore what you said didn't add anything, so you're not moda in anything additional to what's written down. Inami, or another answer, is mishum navle shtar shibud karkaot. A very easy answer is that in fact the shtar says that not only did I borrow money from you, but you can use my house to pay back that money. And once you introduce karka, houses, into this, there is no shvua once it comes to karka, and we've learned this before just from a pasuk, basically, that from a klal prat klal, that you don't make a shvua once you start introducing a responsibility to pay back actual property. So that is an easy way out. It's, we don't love to do it because you could basically do it for anything, but therefore, that's how we conclude that you can't prove from here, that you can't prove one way or the other, but you can't prove from this case that halach is patur, because maybe the reason you don't make a shvua, if you said 2, is not because you've given it over, but because you've actually added nothing to what's already written in the shtar. And that is the first version. Ika, now we are, I guess, around 20 lines from the top, but almost more than a third of the way down. Ika the motav miseifa. There's some who ask the question from the opposite, from the seifa, the same question on Rabbi Chia, from the end of the Breita. The Breita says that was Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who we've just been discussing, who says you do make a shvua. Rabbi Akiva Omer in the seifa, Eino ela k'meshiv aveda, that, by saying you owe 3, you're just being a nice person, basically, because you are just giving him back stuff that essentially were lost to him. And you are pater. Now, let's be medayik from that. Taimad amar shalosh. The implication is that you're only pater because you said 3, and you're basically giving a little bonus, so we pater you from a shvua. But hashtayim chayav. Maybe I could conclude from there that Rabbi Akiva would say that if you said only 2, you'd be chayav to make a shvua. Now, I don't get it. The star, which is kivan de kamodi bekehelach tami, since the star is a good star, it's as if the money is already given to the other person, then even if you admit to 2, it's like you admit to 2 and you gave it to him. So how could Rabbi Akiva say you make a shvua? Shema mina helach chayav. So we can prove from here that Rabbi Akiva holds that even if you gave over the money like Rabbi Chia, that you're still chayav to make a shvua. Says we're not really, just like we added before. La'olam emalecha shtayim nami patur. The truth is that according to Rabbi Akiva, if you said I borrowed 2, you would also be patur for making a shvua, 2 or 3. Hadiktani shalosh. The reason that we said 3 is to tell you that Rabbi Akiva argues from Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. The Afuki made Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. The Amar modem miktzata tanahavi. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, if you said 3, then it's as if you're admitting to part of the claim, right? Because basically the 2 is agreed upon. It's written in the shtar. The claim is the extra 3, and by you saying 3, you're adding 1 to the 2, so you're admitting to 1 of the 3. And Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said you'd be chayav shvua. Kamash Malan, Rabbi Akiva, no, meshiv avida aviu patur. That because you basically didn't have to do it, you're patur. And it says in Marachinami Mistavra, it actually makes a lot of sense that that's the halakha. Rabbi Akiva was not saying you would be chayav shvua if you said 2. You're patur if you say 2, and you're for sure, and you're also patur, not for sure, you're also patur if you say 3. Because if Rabbi Akiva had thought, shtayim chayav, that if you say I owe 2, you have to make a shvua, and 3, b'shalosh hechi patar le Rabbi Akiva, how could Rabbi Akiva make you pater from a shvua by saying 3? It's a clear opportunity, which we try to avoid, of gaming the system. Because according to Rabbi Akiva, arume kama'arim. This person is going to make harama. Harama means a trick or how do you translate in English? I don't know, a scheme, I guess, to get out of money. How are they going to scheme? Sorry?
A deception?
Deception is a good answer, right? So you're going to basically, but deception is the act, I guess, right? You're going to conceive of a deceit, let's say, that will get the money away, because you will say, Savar, this person will think, look, now this is a theoretical. If Rabbi Akiva holds that if you say I owe you 2, that you have to then make a shvua on the other 3, right? So, and then if you say 3, you're going to be pater from a shvua. So this person's going to say, look, I'll get out of paying back money. If I said 2, then I'd have to make a shvua on the rest. So I'm going to say 3, I'll pay 1 extra, but I don't have to make a shvua on the other 2, right? Which is obviously against the indication of keeping people honest. So this is what the person is going to say. If I admit that I owe 2, then I'd have to swear on the other 3, right? And pay back the 2. So therefore, ema shalosh. So I will say I owe 3, and then everyone will say, oh, he's a great guy, and I won't have to swear about the other 2. The havi kameshav avidav iftar. So, but then of course it would defeat the whole purpose, because now you're not doing anyone any favors. You're basically helping yourself by saying you only owe 3. Ella must be shmamina shtayim nami patur. It must be that in fact that if according to Rabbi Akiva, if you say 2, you are also patur. So whether you say 2 or you say 3, you're patur. Ella, says the Gemara now, Kasha Rabbi Chia, right? 20 lines from the bottom. So it turns out that this is a question of Rabbi Chia, right? Because this seems to imply that even though you admitted to part of it, you admitted to 2, or you even admitted, let's say the 2, Rabbi Kiva says you're pater. Why are you pater? It's modem mixat. It must be because since you admitted to it and it's written in the shtar, it's as if you gave it to them. But Rabbi Chia says that even if you gave it to them, you're not pater from modem mixat. So this seems to go against Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia will answer you what we said before. Either shani hatam de kamisaya le shtara, There, the star says two. And so, like I said before in Rashi's explanation, since the star says two, when you say two, you're not adding anything. You're not modem and mikzah. You're saying what's already known, right? So that's one possibility. Inami, mishum dahavili star shibud karkaot, it could be because the star, in fact, which we didn't specify, includes a responsibility to pay land if you borrowed the money and you don't pay it back, and you never swear when there's land involved, and that's a gzer shava, sorry, lima from the pasuk. So therefore, it's not a question on Rebbe Chia. Mativ marzucha breder of Nachman. Everyone, I know this is very complicated, but hopefully we're all following. One last case for today, a few more minutes, and again, we are at a again, I don't know what everyone's Gemara has, but around 15 lines from the bottom. Mativ marzucha.
Where's the guarantee that he paid back the two, even though it says in the star, there's no guarantee he paid it back.
No, the guarantee, but I'm saying, but he will have to pay it back. No, if you have to prove you paid it. So you need a receipt, right? Because even if you paid it back, if the guy says, I never got it from you, and there's a star that says you owe it, you're gonna have to pay it again, right? Because the star goes over your words.
Why wouldn't he have to make a shvua though? If even if it says two in the star, then and he says, I never paid you two, I never got two, I never paid you two. So then he should make a shvua on the two, even though if it's written in the star.
Correct, but that's not the case here, right? The case here is where he didn't deny everything. He said, the star says I borrowed money from you, and I admit I borrowed money from you, but I borrowed three, is what he says, right? So we're trying to figure out, Rabbi Akiva says, he's just a nice guy, you don't make him make a shvu on the remaining two, right? But the question was, what would Rabbi Akiva say if he said, I borrowed two, right? So everyone seems to agree at the end of the day, not everyone does agree, that according to Rabbi Akiva, you would also be patur from a shvu if you said I borrowed just the two. The question is why, right? Because it's seemingly you're modeb and mixat. The guy said you owe me 5. You say I owe you 2. It seems like you're admitting to part of it. So the answer is either because it's as if you already gave it back to him, and according to Rav Sheshet, when you give it back, you no longer are modeb and mixat. Or Rabbi Chia's explanation is that because it's written in the star, you basically were not moded to anything. When you said I owe you 2, you didn't add any guilt or information because we know you owe him 2, right? So you didn't add anything to that. It's essentially like if the guy said I lent you $100 and you say 10 years ago you lent me $100 and I paid it back to you, but this year you lent me nothing, right? Meaning it's not relevant almost to the current debt, or there's karka involved. So that one of those two explanations. Now, Mativ Marzutra Breder of Nachman. Ask Marzutra Breder of Nachman from an interesting Mishnah, I believe it is, in Masechet Shavuot. It might be a Braita, but I think actually it might be a Mishnah. So there the Mishnah says that, let's say, remember, if a person says to you, you bought land from me and you deny it, you can't make them make a shvua on land because remember, we don't make a shvua on karka, okay? So let's say, says Marzutra Breder of Nachman, Ta'anu Kelim v'karkaot. One claimant goes to the other and says, you owe me kelim, which are, objects, a pot, and a plot of land. And hodeh b'kelim v'kafar b'karkot. The man says, I owe you the pots, right? And I'll give them back to you, but I don't owe you the land. Or the opposite, hodeh b'karkot, he admits that he borrowed the land and that the land he's living on belongs to somebody else, but I don't give it back. The kafar b'kelim, but he denies that he borrowed the kelim. You're patur from a shvua, right? And the reason you're patur from a shvua is because you never make a shvua on karka, and the admission that you borrowed the karka is not part of modeh b'mikzah to be mechayev you. Now, if you're hodeh mikzat karkaot, if you admit that you borrowed some of the karka, you're patur from a shvua, because again, you don't make a shvua about karka. But if you're modeh mikzat kelim, if the guy said, I lent you 3 pots, and you say, I only borrowed 1, then you have to be mechayav to make a shvua on the other 2, right? Now, that's the Mishnah. Says our Gemara, Ta'ama, the reason you're patur from a shvua is to kelim v'karkaot, right? Is because you said, in the first case, now we'll see why it doesn't make any sense in a second, but you said, the one claimant said, you borrowed kelim and karka from me, and you admitted to the karka, but you denied the kelim. So there, you don't have to make a shvua. The karka lav bat shvui, because karka is not part of the question of shvua, but implying that if it was kelim v'kelim, if the guy said, you borrowed 2 different sets of pots from me, dumya de kelim v'karkaot, you would be chayiv shvua. Now, hechidami, what is the case, right? What do you mean? How could those cases be similar to karka? Because remember, karka, of course, has the property that it's always sitting there in front of you, right? You can't pick up karka and walk away with it. That's the definition of land. So it's by definition, if I say to someone, I did borrow your land. I borrowed it and it's right here. You have it back. So the comparable case of Kalim is where I say I did borrow your car, or let's say pots. I borrowed your pots, and here it's back. It's halach. So karka is essentially the case of halach, right? Lavda amrle halach. It must be where you borrowed halach, you borrowed and you admitted and you gave it right back, or you presented it to the person, right? Ushmami na halach chayav, and you see from here that it's your potter if it's actual land. But if it's an object that you gave back similar to land, you would be chayiv to make a shvua, which goes like Rabbi Chia. It says, well, lo, that is in fact not the case at all. La'olam, what you just made up is not true, right? Ema lecha, lolam ema lecha, lach kelim v'kelim nami patur. That if a person said you borrowed 2 sets of pots and you admit to one and not to the other, you would also be patur if you gave it back, if it was halach, right? Hadiktani, kelim v'karkaot, and the reason that we said kelim and karkaot is hakamash balan, is to teach you that hodeh b'miktzat kelim, that if you admit to part of the kelim, then you have to make a shvua on the rest of the kelim. Remember, once you make that shvua, we can attach another shvua to it, and it can be a shvua even about the karka. So if you're hodeb miktzat kelim, you'd be fourth to bottom line, chayav af al karkaot. You would be chayav even to make a shvua for karka, because since you admitted to part of the kelim, that's hodeb miktzat, and you have modeb miktzat, you got to make a shvua. We can add a shvua to you for the karka, even though you don't swear about land. In this case, you can swear about land. It says what is the chiddush? 3 lines on the bottom. It's the chiddush of this word called zokikim. Zokikim means we attached, right? Zakuk is to attach something. We attach a shvua to another shvua. So even though you generally don't make a shvua about land, if you're already making a shvua in the same claim about something that's movable, it's metaltalin, you can make a shvua, we can attach a shvua on land to it. And that's the chiddush in the Mishnah in Shavuot. That's a really great chiddush. But we already know that. Tanina, we already learned that in Masechet Kiddushin, which we already did in Daf Yomi. Because we learned in Masechet Kiddushin in the Mishnah, quote now, Zokikim hanichasim she'ena machrayut, objects that are not have achrayut, that are not responsible for loans, like metaltalin, like movable objects, can grab et hanichasim sheyesh lam achrayut l'shava aleim, can grab nichasim that do have achrayut, like property, to make you have to swear about the property. So we already learned it in a Mishnah. So how could this Mishnah in Shavuot come to tell you this halacha, which is a great halacha, but it's one we already know? Well, sometimes the Mishnah repeats itself. Hacha ikar, this Mishnah in Shavuot is the main Mishnah because it's talking about concepts of Shavuot. And Hatam in Kiddushin, Agav Grara Naspa, we brought it along, we dragged it along because of context, right? Remember in Kiddushin, we were talking about Nechasim Sheish Lamachrayut and Nain Lamachrayut. So we talked about that concept. But the reality is that, in fact, this is principally taught in Masechet Shavuot, and it belongs in Masechet Shavuot. And all the Mishnahs telling us in Shavuot is that if you admit or modeh b'miktzat to kelim, to a movable object, we can also be mechayiv you to make a shvua about property, karka, that you normally would not have to make a shvua about. But we cannot prove at this point, and tomorrow we're going to keep going, we cannot prove that halech, that if you say, I did in fact borrow some of it, or I didn't take some of it, but here it is back, I'm giving it back to you right now, and everything else I deny, you cannot prove from here whether in fact that is giving it back or not. And at this point, we're going to continue this tomorrow, but at this point continues to be a machloket Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Sheshet, whether you would make a shvua about the other half that you denied. Now, I just want to point out last point. We're up to the last word of the page, but I said what Rashi seems to say, which not everyone agrees with what I said, which is that halach means you actually gave it back to the person, right? It's not so clear as you go through the sugya that it actually means you gave it back to him, but it certainly means that you presented it to him, meaning it's right here in front of you. So it's not clear that it actually was given to him, but it certainly is available, right? So we'll see tomorrow as we get into some of these cases as to how you understand the halach. But halach is some concept of I admit I borrowed the 50 and here it is, right? Or I actually gave it to him. And the rest of it, is it still considered to be I admitted part of it, or is it I dismissed those charges and now I deny the remaining charges and I'm kofar and everything, which is what Rav Sheshet says, or is it still modeh b'miktzah like Rabbi Chia? And I encourage you to continue this tomorrow morning, or whenever it is
But then I still don't understand that concept of the Shnayim, because even if you say that you say Halech, for instance, whatever, whether it's Rav Sheshes or Rav Chia, the concept that it ain't mushbim ala karka is easier to understand. But the other one, if he did not give it back to him and it's still in his possession, even the two, why isn't he chayiv on a shvuah on that?
Because he basically didn't remember, if you're kofar everything, you don't make a shvuah, right? If a person says you owe me $10 and you say I don't owe you anything, you don't make a shvuah for all the reasons we discussed already, unless you have witnesses. In this case, you basically have a shtar that says I lent you $2, right? That's what the shtar says, a minimum of $2. The person comes and says, I actually lent you $10 and just didn't write it clearly in the shtar. Another person says, I admit that I owe you $2, right? So what we're saying in that case is that, at least according to that answer, is that because the two are written in the shtar, your admission of $2 is not an admission at all. You're just paying basically what you have to pay based on the shtar. You didn't on your own admit to anything. You denied everything except what was written in the shtar. And so you pay what's written in the shtar, but you're basically a complete denial on everything else, and you don't make a shvuah. That's one answer. Now, of course, the fact that we bring a second answer means that not everyone agrees with that answer, right? And the inami always means that it's not the strongest answer, and maybe another answer is the second one, that it's karka, and that therefore you don't make a shvuah. But that's the first explanation as well. Okay, everyone. Thank you for accommodating the time. I apologize. Now, I'm happy next week to do whatever works for everyone. I'm, God willing, around, and hope everyone has a great week. Shavua tov.
Thank you. Shavua tov.
Dr. Clark, thank you.